Hi, this is Heather Christie again, and I'm excited to be with you for our second session. And in this session, we're really going to be talking about behavioral styles and the impact that behavioral styles have on your ability to influence others. As John Maxwell would say, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And so I'm going to talk to you about the Platinum Rule. And the Platinum Rule is do unto others as they would have done to them. Now, I'll explain to you a little bit about what that means in a minute here. I want to go back to something that we talked about in the first session, and that is that line of choice. And we talked about being above the line or below the line. Below the line, as you can see, we have blame, excuses, and denial. And above the line, we have ownership, accountability, and responsibility. And when you think about, in general, your ability to communicate and your ability to influence others, I want you to look at where you may find yourself below the line. So if you ever come across an employee that you're working with that maybe isn't doing exactly what you want them to do, or you can look at your children. Do you ever have challenges influencing your children or your spouse? The thing is, we are influencing people all day, every day, in every communication that we have. And you know there are those people out there that are so influential that they just get things done and people just want to do things for them. And then there are other people who can't quite get others to do anything. And I want you to think about where you fall there and what do you say to yourself? So, where are you blaming? Do you ever blame someone else? So I've asked them to do it over and over and they're just not doing it. So you make it about the other person. Or you make excuses about why you haven't been able to be as impactful as you want to be, whether that be in sales. That's a great place to look. Do you make any excuses about your ability to influence others? Do you ever say, oh, I didn't have enough time, or it wasn't the right situation, or I'm not talking to the right person? What excuses do you come up with? And then the other area to look is denial. Where are you in denial? And remember that acronym. It stands for Don't Even Notice I Am Lying. So are there any areas where you're lying to yourself about your ability to influence? Maybe you think that you have great influence, but your results might be telling you otherwise. So here's an opportunity to make some notes for yourself and see if you can find any areas below the line as it relates to the way that you communicate and your ability to influence others. And we're going to talk about how you can take that above the line. We have a definition for communication, and the definition goes like this. Communication is the response you get. And so I want to kind of break that down and talk that through for a second. If communication is the response you get, that's a very above the line kind of definition for communication. Because what I'm saying is it's my responsibility as the communicator to make sure that you understand what I'm saying and that you act on it in a way that really works. And so when you think about communication, how you are as a communicator, are you taking full responsibility for the communication being received? Or do you count too much on the other person to take that responsibility? I think most people expect that when they communicate, it's up to the other person to take it and do the right things. And I'm asking you to kind of think about it in a little bit of a different way. So if communication is the response you get, let's just talk about sales as an example. If I am working with a prospect and I'm trying to sell them my product or service and they don't buy it, what was my communication to them? Instead of looking at why they didn't buy, turn the mirror towards yourself and look at, well, how did I communicate? What didn't I communicate? What didn't I get through to that person? Did I have trouble proving to them the value, the benefit that they would have? Most people, if they come up with an objection around a price, what they're really saying is you haven't shown me the value. So that's just one example of an area that you might look at for how you're communicating to other people. Do you spend too much time focusing on how they're receiving your communication, or do you spend more time really looking at you as the communicator and what you might be able to do differently? Well, this whole session is really about how you communicate and how you influence. And we use a profile called the DISC profile. That's D-I-S-C. And for those of you who have ever taken a DISC profile, or maybe you've taken other profiles like Myers-Briggs, there are a number of different assessment tools that are out there. But we're going to be working with DISC, and here's why I like DISC. I've taken a lot of different profiles over my professional career, and the reason I really like DISC is because it's so simple, just working with 4 different styles, and everyone can understand it. You can understand it like a language. And there are 4 major styles, and I'm going to go through these quickly. You can see them on your screen. There's the D, the I, the S, and the C. And these styles represent the observable behavior of human beings. So the DISC profile is really just a universal language of observable human behavior, and it truly is a language. Most people who have ever, quote, done DISC before, if they've ever taken a profile and read it, they feel like they've already done it. Now, I'm going to ask you for a moment to get rid of any preconceived notions that you have about the DISC profile. I have trained trainers of DISC, and they still find new and different ways to use it. So I'm going to ask you, even if you know it or you think you know it, to just ask yourself the question, what more can I take from this session? Because what I'd like to do is take DISC and help you to become more influential. All right, so the DISC profile, starting with the D quadrant in the upper left there, the D is an observable behavior that is all around dominance. So these people are results-oriented, they're very direct, they tend to be very competitive, and they're also outgoing people, but they're task-oriented. Okay, so that's just a high-level overview of the D profile. The I profile is also outgoing, so they have that in common with the D, but the I stands for influence, and the I profile is really a people person. So when you think of the I, you'll think of somebody who is very enthusiastic, they're optimistic, they're friendly, they're kind of the life of the party. They love to be around crowds. And then you've got the S profile, which is also people-oriented, but they're much more reserved. So you'll find the S profile, it stands for steadiness. And these people are they're sincere, they're patient, they can be modest, and they're very stable and steady. They're great supporters. Now, on the last quadrant there, we have the C profile, and the C stands for compliance. So the C profile is reserved like the S profile is, but is more on the task side rather than the people side. So that C personality, they are very accurate. They're very detail-oriented. They're cautious, and they're contemplative. They think through everything they do. And sometimes they have the analysis paralysis. So the C profile is like your quintessential accountant. And what I always say to people is, if your accountant is not a C profile, you want to fire him or her, because you really need somebody that has that detail-oriented side to be your accountant. So that's kind of a high-level overview of the 4 distinct profiles. So let's review again. The D and the I profile are both outgoing. The C and the S profile are more reserved. If you look on the left-hand side, the D and the C profile are more task-oriented, where the I and the S profile are more people-oriented. So if you haven't taken this DISC profile before and you're not sure which one you are, there's a couple different ways to figure that out. Number one, you can take a profile, and I'll give you a link later on that can help you find one. But if you haven't taken a profile and you just want to figure it out during this call, just ask yourself 2 questions. Number one, would I consider myself to be more outgoing or more reserved? And number 2, am I more task-oriented? Do I like to just get things done and check them off the list? Or am I more of a people person? And hopefully you can answer those 2 questions at a very high level and give yourself an idea of whether you're D, I, S, or C. So it's important in step 1 to understand who you are. And anytime I train somebody on DISC, I say, look, the very first thing to know is you have to know yourself better. And this is something that all great leaders are really, really good at. They understand who they are, why they are, how they think, how they behave, and so it's nothing is surprising for them. So get to know who you are. When you take a DISC profile, you receive a multiple-page report that really tells you all about you. And it's not just about your behavior. I mean, they'll come up with a description of your behavior that will make you laugh because a report could be generated that so closely mirrors who you are. In addition to that, though, there are a number of different things that the profile will go through that will be helpful for you. Things like understanding your strengths, really understanding your limitations and areas where you need to do some work, understanding how you like to be communicated with. Everything will start to line up and make a lot of sense. And wouldn't it be helpful for you to know those things, not just in your professional world, but also personally? I have used this a lot with executives, with their families, husband and wives taking these. You hear the term opposites attract, and it's really true. People attract to each other based on complementing each other. My husband and I have very distinct profiles, and they work together extremely well. And yet, they can be a major source of frustration if you don't understand this DISC profile thing. So you might start to see some of that as we talk a little bit more. So the very first goal is that you know your own behavioral style and you understand what you are naturally. Number two, you want to learn what works and what doesn't work for you. And that's just really important to know because some of the biggest sources of frustration that you might come across in work and in real life have to do with dealing with different behavioral styles that are not your own. And so understanding that can maybe help alleviate some of that frustration for you and just help you to recognize what the other style is of the other person. Number three, what we need to know is we need to understand and learn how to identify other people's styles. When I started off this session, I told you I was going to talk about the platinum rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have done unto you. So that's all me focused, and I want to treat people the way I want to be treated. That is a great way to go about life. When it comes to communicating and influencing, we say there's a little bit of a different rule, which is the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have done unto them. And what that really means is I want to communicate with someone the way they want to be communicated to. Because every one of these profiles I've just described has a different way in which they communicate and want to be communicated with. So let me just go through, and we're going to talk about DISC for a minute and the way that they would like to be communicated with. So the D profile, if you remember, is very dominant, very results-oriented. They're the drivers. Usually they're the leaders of the companies. And here's how you can recognize a D profile. They are always in a hurry. They're always out in front. They're constantly checking their watch because they've got somewhere to be. So the D profile really values their time. And when you're working with a D profile, if you are an I, S, or C, and you just behaved in your normal way, the D profile could get pretty frustrated because the D profile just wants to get to business and get it done. So you don't want to be too much of a people person with that D behavioral style. On the other hand, if you're talking to an I profile, somebody who's a real high I people person, someone who's outgoing and they're enthusiastic and they're friendly, you would never want to act like a D and just get straight to business. Because the I profile, they want to relate, they want to connect a little bit, they want to, have a good conversation. So sometimes you need to be able to slow it down and take some time and be personable with that person, because if you don't, the I profile is going to think you don't like them. So you've got to learn when you meet someone who's bubbly, they're outgoing, they've got a smile on their face, they tend to be talking a lot. That's the key to identify an I profile. They're usually talking and they're usually smiling. So if you've got someone like that, you really want to relate with them. Take some time on the human side to connect before you get straight to business. With the S profile, the S is very steady and they're reserved, so you wouldn't want to speak as quickly with the S. You want to slow it down. And you don't want to be too loud with the S either. You have to be loud with the I because they're usually loud. But with the S, you're going to take it down and you're going to slow it down. You wouldn't want to go straight to business with an S either. The S needs time to trust you, to like you. S's are very good people, but they don't like a whole lot of people. So if you find an S somewhere in a big public group, they're not going to be crazy about being in that place. They'd much rather be in a one-on-one conversation. And with the C profile, Remember, the C is the detail-oriented. They're task-oriented. They're reserved. Very analytical. Left brain. Always thinking. When you're talking to a C profile, you don't want to be really chatty. The C profile very much just wants facts and figures and data and what do you need and by when. And by the way, you would never push a C profile to make a decision immediately. You'd want to give them time to analyze, to think about it, to work it through. If you ever put the pressure on a C profile to make a quick decision, that's going to be really tough. It's going to be very uncomfortable, and you're probably not going to get it from them. So you see, the idea is that you get to know what the different profiles are, and you modify behavior. You treat them the way they want to be treated. It's kind of like matching and mirroring. Neuro-linguistic programming, if you've ever heard of that, this is sort of a microcosm of this, where you want to sort of mirror the behavior of someone else to be the most effective you can be in that communication. To be someone who can influence someone else, you have to be able to put yourself in their shoes and understand how they want to be communicated with. So if I can give you a real life example, when I was a practicing attorney for a lot of years, I was a lobbyist. And I had to fly all over the country and Washington, D.C., and all over the world, actually, at times. And I would be put in front of a public official, a senator, a congressman, or, whatever public official I was working with at the time. And chances are good that I didn't know this person in advance. I didn't know what their background was or how they behaved. And I had to very quickly pick up on cues that they gave me so that I could determine how to work with them and how to speak with them in a way that they would best understand me. Now, unfortunately for me, I didn't have the formal DISC training back then. I had to just pick this up on the fly, and everybody picks it up at some level. Those with a very high EQ, emotional quotient, those who relate well with others, they tend to pick up on this very quickly. And others don't pick up on it as well, and this is why doing some formal training in this area makes a huge, huge difference for people. Even if you're great at it, can you imagine being even better? So at some point I did get some training along the way and was able to look at this box called DISC and say, oh my God, I finally understand what I'm doing. When I had a senator sitting across from me that was checking his watch and had to be somewhere, headed to the next meeting, I recognized very quickly I'm not going to pull out a whole stack of papers and information and data to give to him. I'm going to give him a one-pager, give him the top 3 bullet points about what we need to accomplish, and let him know that I can get all the rest of the information to his staff. And that was a great meeting because I didn't take his time. I didn't talk about me. They don't care about me. So the idea of really learning how to identify others' behavior becomes a skill that is probably one of the most important skill sets that anybody can ever really master. I mean, think about this. If you could always identify with the kind of behavioral style that each person has when you're in conversation with them, you're going to be able to connect at a completely different level. And I want you to think about this. Think about how you meet someone and you either immediately kind of like them and connect with them, or sometimes you might even be, you might repel them. You may have a dislike for someone because of how they show up for you. So think about if you had the ability to, every time you meet with someone new, have enough of ability to identify their behavior that you could mirror their behavior and speak to them in a way that really resonated with them. Imagine if you could do that with all of the employees who work for you. Imagine if you could do that with all of your family members. It's a very different way of being. So remember, leadership is all about influence. And the better your ability to influence others, the better your leadership qualities. And that's what takes you everywhere you go. So the last point to talk about here in terms of, understanding the DISC and what do we do with it is learning to modify your behavior to change the influence. So the only way I'm going to know to modify my behavior is if I've truly identified the behavior of the people that I'm in front of. So I'm going to run through the DISC again very quickly. And I realize this is a very short session and I'm doing the highest level. I've got further training if you want to go to a deeper level here. But let's just look at how would we identify someone who's a D, I, S, or C. And I'm going to go in reverse order here. So let's take the C profile. What are the dead giveaways that someone's a C profile? And usually what you look for with this C is they're going to be usually extremely organized, and they're going to care about all the details. So let's talk about what a C would look like if they were going swimming, as an example. If a C was going swimming, they would plan in advance. They probably have a list of all the things they needed to bring with them. They would never show up anywhere without all of the right things because they have that list. Not everybody has that. So the C profile, they're going to have everything they need, including the right sunblock. They're also going to probably have multiple different SPFs because there are different sunblocks for different parts of the body that are important. And they're going to make sure when they get to the pool that they first read the pool rules because they actually really do care about complying with those rules. So they'll read them through. And if they see anybody that's breaking the pool rules, they'll make sure you know about it. I'm going to give you a quick example here. We live in Southwest Florida, and we have a resort-style swimming pool in our neighborhood. And there were a bunch of people on vacation. They were out swimming and having a great time, and there was a guy there drinking a beer in the pool. And one of our neighbors walked up to him and said, there's no drinking containers allowed in the pool. And the guy who was having the beer in the pool just looked at him and thought, what are you, crazy? I'm on vacation. He said, I'm all set. So he didn't pay attention to him. And the gentleman who was telling him about the pool rules grabs his camera and starts taking pictures so that he can send that into the association and let the association know that someone was breaking the rules. Now, that's a very extreme example of a C behavior, but the C behavior really is all about following the rules. They're all about being compliant. They really care about others being compliant. It's a huge source of frustration for a C profile if other people aren't following the rules. So you may be thinking about some people you know, or maybe you relate to this yourself, and you can start to understand that that's just someone with a real desire to be compliant. So that's the kind of thing that you might see from a C. Details that, the C's, if they have a junk drawer, even their junk drawer is organized. So they're organized, they're very left-brained, they will think a lot, they will ask a lot of questions, and they'll always want more detail. The C profile, before they go in to buy a car, they will have researched for days, maybe weeks, and they will know every last detail about that car and what the MSRP is and how much they should buy it for. So what I always say is, if you don't have C in your profile and you want to buy anything, you find a friend who's a C and you just ask them what they found. Because I always cut off hours of research by asking a C for their opinion. All right, the S profile, how would you recognize an S profile if you're just meeting someone and you don't know them? Well, the S will show up for you as much quieter. So their voice is soft. Sometimes you have to say, what? I can't hear you. What'd you say? If you're constantly saying that to someone, chances are very good they're an S profile because they speak more softly. They're much more quiet. In a social interaction, you might not get anything out of them. An S does not show emotion. And it's not that they're not emotional. You just won't see it. They have a poker face. You can run into an S, and if they're a high enough S, you would not know whether they just, lost their favorite aunt or if they just won the lottery because they are very, very poker-faced. And the S profile, again, is slow and steady. They don't like change, so the S profile likely will live in the same house for years and years and years. They'll be in the same job for years and years and years. And so there are some indicators that you'll have either through questions you ask them or just from their physical demeanor and the tone of their voice and the speed that they go that will tell you that they're an S profile. The I profile, they're really easy to tell. If there's a lot of I in someone, you can't miss it because they are enthusiastic, they're optimistic, they're outgoing. I think of the high I with the hands above the head, life of the party, having a great time. smiling. They want everyone to get along and have a good time. So you can think about that kind of person who's in your life and recognize that pretty quickly. They are not shy to talk, and as I mentioned before, they're usually doing more talking than listening. So that's a great indicator that you're working with an I and a people person. And then the last one, the D, I gave you some clues already. Usually in a hurry, almost always checking their watch. If you walk into their office, a tip-off is that they might have diplomas on their wall, would be something prominent. They would have maybe pictures with politicians or some other famous people. But the Ds tend to be the kinds that are, kind of out there and leading. You will see them if you're in a meeting with a D. You'll know it because they're typically leading the meeting. They're taking charge of things. So those are some indicators for how to find out if you're talking to a D, I, S, or C. And remember that it's all about how you modify your behavior. So I have a rule of thumb. I say what you need to be in conversation with others is you need to be a high disc. And here's what I mean by that. We use the terminology high or low to describe whether somebody is or is not a certain behavioral style. When I say be a high disc, what I mean by that is you figure out whether they're a D, I, S, or C, and you raise your D, I, S, or C to match theirs. And so in any given situation, you don't act like you act like whoever you need to act like to be the most influential person that you can be in that conversation. So in closing, what I'd like to say is we've done such a high-level overview. I hope that I didn't confuse you and gave you just enough to make you curious to say, I would really like to learn more about this. DISC is a language, and like anything else, if you were to just take, in college, I took a semester of Russian in college because it was the only foreign language course I could get into, and I wanted to get one under my belt. So I took Russian for a semester. If you asked me to speak Russian today, I could probably give you a couple of words, and I can still read some letters, but that's about the extent of it. And that was a whole semester worth of training. Now, if I just gave you a half hour on DISC here, and maybe you've had some DISC training in the past, you still wouldn't be expected to speak that language. So a couple rules about the DISC language. You want to make sure that you only use the DISC language with other people who know the DISC language. So I don't want you to jump off this call and go to your husband and say, hey, you're a high D. He may not like that. You're going to have to make sure that anyone you talk about DISC with has the ability to understand what you're talking about because it's really a language. So where do you start? I would have you start by taking a DISC profile if you haven't taken one. If you've taken one more than a year ago, you may want to retake it. So either go back to the person who you got it from originally, or you can go to www.lessonsfromnetwork.com/DISC. That's www.lessonsfromnetwork.com/DISC, D-I-S-C. And click on the link that mentions DISC profile, and you can get one through us if you'd like to. We also have an online video training that we throw in for free for anybody who does our DISC profiles, so I'm happy to send that out to you if you take a DISC profile. There are books out there. We have an e-book that we can get for you as well that's free that will describe for you all the different profiles and how you can learn to modify your behavior based on someone else's profile. So there are a lot of different ways to continue your study in DISC, and I just recommend to everybody out there, find your resources and go after it and learn this language like it's the most important language you can ever know because it will change your results in every single aspect of your life. So with that, I'm going to sign off for now and look forward to talking to you again for our third session.